Good evening, everybody. I'm still testing out the microphone. I hope you can hear me in the back, but I'm also not too shouty. As a lecturer, I'm used to project my voice, so I need to now really tone this down. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's event. It's very great to see you all here. I see a few friends and friendly faces, but also lots of people I don't know. So I do hope, I know there's a solid audience for the Courtauld talks, but I hope with this, our first event in the Art and Business Talk series, which we hope to build on, I do also hope that this event brought new faces to the Courtauld. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Dirk Boll to this evening event, our speaker, who will present his book, The Art and Its Markets. And yes, thank you for your interest, and I think we're ready to start, but please be aware that as it's a student-led institution, there might be some latecomers, not that, and maybe it's all of Dirk's colleagues that might be late, that would also be quite funny. My name is Stephanie Diekfoss. I joined the Courtauld Institute last October as a senior lecturer, and I'm also the course co-convener for the new master's program in art and business. We are welcoming our first cohort of students this autumn, and we are very much looking forward to this. However, as we are really keen on developing and teaching the new program, we are also really hoping that that will be the start of an expansion of the research of the Courtauld's expertise and excellency in the study of the art market that also encompasses more public events, more research, PhD studentships, etc. So we will organize regular talks and events, but we have also higher set ambitions, so please carry on to follow this space. Before I introduce Dirk, and then let him obviously talk about his book, I would like to also invite my course co-convener, Dr. Tom Stammers, who will say just a few words about our program. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie, and it's lovely to see everybody, especially on a sunny evening. I know there's other ways we could be spending our time tonight, but it's lovely that we're all together here. I want to personally thank Dirk because his earlier book, Art for Sale, is one of my most thumbed books in the library. And when I was first teaching myself about the art market, it was an invaluable guide. So to move from this very useful compact book to this kind of monumental publication that we're going to be celebrating tonight is a fine achievement. As Stephanie says, I'm the co-convener on the new MA in Art and Business, which will be starting this autumn. And the course, I think, is a really exciting new direction for the Courtauld, which really wants to establish itself as a leading place for research into both the historic and the contemporary art markets. I just want to say a little bit about what the course is going to comprise, so you get a flavour of our ambition. Stephanie and I have complementary research interests. Stephanie is the contemporary specialist. I work on the historical side of things. And so we want students to both think about how art markets have developed from the 17th century, and then also think about some of the key institutions, actors and debates that are structuring the art market today. We'll be thinking about issues around art and law, and I'm looking at a colleague at the back here who's going to help with that. Kyle, thank you very much. But we're also going to be thinking about disputed cultural heritage, art fairs, and the students are going to have specific training in the business of art from colleagues at King's Business School. And we're very pleased to have this new strategic partnership between the Courtauld and KCL. I'm also really excited that students on the course will get to look at how the market has shaped the collections of the Courtauld and think about the market histories behind many works of art that we can now find in Somerset House. So we're delighted the interest the course has generated, and I'm very grateful for all of you who've made offers of support and enthusiasm. If you would like to talk to me or Stephanie more about what we're planning to do with the course, we'll be around at the end tonight, so do come and have a chat. But without further ado, back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Tom. So now, slowly introducing Dirk, and there is a lot to say, and I know that he will talk about his publications himself, so I won't even talk about that. What I want to highlight with my introduction is Dirk's remarkable capability and capacity as a full-time senior staff member at Christie's in London, but also being an established writer, author, and scholar who has been writing insightful, information-rich books about the art market that reflect on its historical as well as current developments, while always posing pertinent questions about its future. And I think this is why I treasure his book so much, and I thought he would be the right person to start our talk series and also really reflect the ethos of our master's program that Thomas just alluded to. These works are crafted with academic rigor, scholarly ambition, yet they remain accessible, and I think very much the formats and the price scales and the way that they feel actually like really humble publications, even what Tom described as the monumental most recent book that you see here is actually when I've been carrying it around, I've been reading them volume by volume, and they feel really like study books you want to carry with you and have with you, and I think that makes his publications really special. They remain accessible and enjoyable for anybody to read, as long as you appreciate detailed subchapters, but I'm sure we will talk about the classification of chapters in Dirk's book a bit more. So the evening will proceed as follows. Dirk will introduce his book, but he has also asked me to pose him a number of questions, so we will engage for a while in conversation. I have selected one question that I think relevant for each of the 6 mini volumes or chapters that are contained in the book. After that, we will, of course, open the floor for questions and ensuring that there is sufficient time because we really want to also engage with you as an audience. And I say that, I hope that is true, that Dirk is happy to respond to inquiries about his book, but also as such a specialist of the market that is also happy to talk about more general questions. Now I'm looking at him and he's nodding, very good. So there is, of course, a lot to discuss at this present time. And then, of course, I want to not forget to invite you all that at around 6:30 we will close the official part of the evening, but I would like to invite everybody for a small refreshment in the research room, which is just down the corridor here. I've also been told to let you all know that the event will be recorded, including the Q&A session, so just that you are aware of that. Right, so I hope everyone who is here has read Dirk's biography on the internet and on our Courtauld website. But I really want to come back to this duality of academic profession, education, interest, and a professional life within the core, the inside. I don't think you can get closer to the actual art and commerce aspect of the art market than working in an auction house. Dirk initially studied law at the universities of Göttingen and Freiburg, completing his judicial traineeship at the law courts in Stuttgart and the German Chamber of Commerce in Brussels. He then pursued additional studies in cultural management in Ludwigsburg and finished these while already being employed at Christie's, where he started to work in 1998. Subsequently, while already being in full-time employment, he submitted his PhD thesis in 2004, titled in German, Der Kampf um die Kunst, The Fight for Art, very inspiring title, which explored the relationship between art dealer and auction houses and also the conflicts between them, however, with a particular focus on legal frameworks and market structures. Topic he comes back to and revisits in, of course, a much expanded and updated version in his new publication. Subsequently, he worked at Christie's in London, in Stuttgart, in Zurich, where he became the managing director of Christie's in Switzerland. In 2011, Dirk was appointed the European managing director at Christie's and moved his office to London, King Street. In 2017, he assumed the role of president of Christie's EMEA region, which includes Europe and the UK, Middle East, Africa, but at that time, of course, also included Russia. And this is where Dirk and I first met at Moscow, the Russian Fair for Contemporary Art in Moscow in 2016. Dirk is now serving as a professor of arts management at the University for Theatre and Media in Hamburg, and is currently the deputy chairman for 20th and 21st Century Art at Christie's in London. There would be much more to say, but I'll stop here. I also have very strong opinions about his book, but I keep those back for our conversation later on, and I would like to invite Dirk to tell us about the genesis and what his thoughts were behind his latest publication. Thank you, dear.
Yeah, let me know everything about me. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me tonight to talk to you about the book and making books and how it got to the point. So my move, or my kind of duality, as you call it, between working in auction house, what I started in '98, and lecturing and subsequently publishing happened in 2001 when the professor who took my PhD, how do you call these?
Supervisor.
My supervisor, thank you, learning curve today, tick. So my supervisor actually took over the Institute for Cultural Management, for Art Management in Hamburg, and asked me whether I could consider to teach art market studies, because that wasn't on offer over there. And kind of the rest is history. I've done it ever since. It is a bit of a part-time hobby. Most of the time it's fun and rewarding, not always, but as I said, most of the time. And as you know, with teaching comes writing and publishing. With me, I owe that to a Zurich-based publisher. She one day, looking for new authors because she wanted to grow her company, said to me, listen, have you ever considered writing a book about whatever, starting with your PhD, ending with your job? And I actually had not, and she convinced me to give it a try, and this is where my first book derived from, and that's the Kunst ist käuflich, the first with the gosh, what's her name? The Geneva-based artist, Sylvie Fleury, thank you, with the Sylvie Fleury work on the cover, who very generously said, yes, you can have it, and I don't charge you for the rights, came out. The next book I did was actually collecting texts around deaccessioning, which was already a bit of a topic in the early 2000s, and then quieted down again. It's the book next to that, Marktplatz Museum. And by then, Kunst ist käuflich, the first book, had been sold out, and the publisher had to admit that they were actually too small to give it a reprint, because also the second edition should have been in paperback to be more affordable and more lightweight. And so I said, so what do we do then? Do I go to the copy shop? And she said, no, we can sell it on to a larger publisher, and they would do kind of a second edition. You had to revise it, and then it's a paperback, and could also maybe sell in bigger numbers, and would be more accessible for your students. And this is what happened. I happen to know Gerd Hatje, a great art publisher of the post-war era, who sadly passed away about 10 years ago, founder of the company that's today called Hatje Cantz. So they took over the manuscript of Kunst ist käuflich, and the rest is history, have inspired me to do many more books ever since. And all these books look like, as you can see here, very straightforward. Most of them, apart from the collection book, soft cover, small format, accessible, not expensive. And then there was that moment in time when the publisher was wondering whether I could renew the volume on the deaccessioning question. And I said, well, let's look into that. And I took it out of the shelf and had a good read. And I must say, it was almost 20 years later, and it was still absolutely to the point, which is the quality of the text by many authors in that book, but it's also a sign for a development that has not taken place. So there was a bit of a discussion in the early 2000s, there was a bit around 2008, 2009, the big financial crisis, but as such, at least on the European continent, the deaccessioning question has not been dealt with. And so I said, listen, it's actually not really it's not really au courant. We don't have to redo that because it's still good. It was still available, so I thought, why would we do that? But they, of course, need to grow their program, and so they sat me down and discussed with me a new book, and then I said, well, why don't we have 15 years later a new version of the handbook? And they said, well, let's look what really sold. And of course, as an author, you never know that. Sometimes you are told, you forget, whatever, because it is when these things are out, they're gone, they're actually out. It's a bit of an exception that I'm now standing here, kind of what feels like years after I've delivered the manuscript to the publisher and to the translation office in this case. So we sat down, we looked at that, and the publisher actually had a very good idea. She suggested to combine the Art Market Handbook with my little texts series on collecting fields. And so this was intertwined, and I started working on that, and this was fun, and as you know, these it's computers and I prefer paper, as you can see. That's fine, yeah. So, and there were some eyebrows kind of raised when they understood the volume of the text I was working on, and there was an editor, and I always expected to be asked, I don't know, cut back by 1/3 or something like that. And you can do that, and I had done that before. And we went through that whole process, and they always said, oh, it's such a lot of text and kind of so many pages, and then you also want images. Kind of how do we do that? And one day we sat together, and a dummy was created, and the dummy was sitting in front of us, and it looked like that, and it was kind of rather ugly, not aesthetically, but kind of as an object. It was big and heavy, and then I took it and I opened it, and acknowledging it was a dummy, kind of it immediately broke, kind of in the back broke, kind of the very second I touched it, and so it was really something I thought maybe not. It looked like that, like a brick, like a piece of brick covered in white cardboard. At the same time, a friend of mine, the contemporary artist Tobias Siloni, had done a publication where every chapter was a little volume, and that was kind of with a little cardboard, not a box, more like a banderole. And this is what I suggested, and this is what it became. You see it here. Stephanie already gave the secret away. It's actually every chapter is a little volume, and this is how it looks when it comes when it's let out of its cage. The design actually happened in my dining room, because we sat around the dining table, and the graphic designer said, we now have to do a lot of designing, because every volume inside that box needs design. And how do we do that? And do you have a favorite artwork? And I said, yeah, I have this work by Emil Knöbel, the German artist, now in his late 70s, Joseph Beuys' pupil, etc., etc. And this graphic designer said, oh, wonderful, and I get the colors, and I design something around that artwork. So actually, this is my homage to the publishers, to the graphic designer, but also to Emil Knöbel, whose work I adore. Yeah, the 6 volumes. As I said, it's each chapter it became a volume. So the first chapter is the introduction to what we are looking at, and is the history of the art market, something I'm totally in love with, because I think it's so interesting for everybody who is kind of, I don't know, walking a contemporary art fair, to understand that whatever happens in the art markets, 95% of that has a very, 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 very long tradition. Art fairs, or early forms of fairs you find in the Middle Ages. The Romans had wonderful auction houses with interesting terms and conditions, etc., etc. So what we at times perceive as being really contemporary is actually following a ruling that is very old. So the first volume is the history of the art market. The second volume introduces the players. So each player, the auction house, the gallery, the art trade, the art critic, etc., are introduced. The third volume is the framework. This is economic as well as the legal framework. The fourth chapter is the thickest one, is devoted to collecting fields. The fifth is what we call business getting. Where do you find the stuff? Where do you find the artists who produce what you like and think you can offer? And where do you find the stuff you want to sell on the secondary market? And how to sell on the primary and secondary market is covered in the last volume. So this is how it was designed, and actually I still like that. But then we also had to deal with the intertwining. The main text that was kind of following what I would call fairly strict concept of how I want to cover the field, and kind of little background and collecting field. I call them boxes, although we later took away the frames. So what we did, and again, this was not my idea. This is why I can say I think it's a great idea. The publisher said, why don't you have the text in a full page in black and it runs through, and then you have wherever it fits in, you have little kind of one pages or double pages with in-depth knowledge about a very narrow topic, actually. And it was also a good excuse to have images, because otherwise it would be a terrible kind of lead monster. And with these little kind of in-depth boxes, you could also kind of combine, for example, the history of the art market with collecting fields, or the framework. I mean, the legal framework, I have to admit, has barely any images. I remember beautiful ivory furniture, kind of in the chapter where I speak about the ivory ban. But it was a bit of an excuse how to bring images in and kind of how to give a bit of an in-depth view. It's very interesting when you speak to readers that how differently they kind of perceive it and use it and read it. And some say, well, I just started in the beginning and at some point I will come to the end. I think that's incredibly boring. But, and others say, well, I only flipped through and then I started to read one of these boxes and I liked them, and then I never read the text, but I read all the boxes and everything in between these two. I have another image of you so you can see what I already kind of read between the lines of Stephanie's criticism is that it is printed in small fonts, I have to say, especially these boxes. Additionally, the boxes are printed or the text in the boxes is printed in blue. I wonder whether this is so good when you think about contrast and kind of reading, being above 35, like me. But the idea was we could also compress quite a bit, because otherwise it would have been double the size. And this is how it looks when there wasn't anything to show. What is it? Oh, it's opening up the market in France. Yeah, I think when you turn that page, you find it must be the auctioneer, it must be the Grand Palais, when it was the auction room for the Sonor collection. However, this is how it looks. You can see it here in real life. And that's all I have to say about this book. I'm very grateful to Christie, who actually sponsored the translation. Because as you can already hear, when I speak English, my native language is a different one. I write in German, so someone else who is a professional did that. It was not done by ChatGPT, because that wasn't existing kind of 5 minutes ago. Maybe the next book will, but certainly that will be a small, very slim, very elegant hardcover volume. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great, so now that we know everything about how the book came about, I can deep dive into it, and I look very much forward to it. But actually, before we do that, as an academic, I not only started to read the book from the beginning, I haven't made it just to the end, but I'm nearly there, but I've also read nearly all the footnotes. And just before we go to the content, you might be laughing, but I do think Dirk maybe underplays slightly the enormous amount of research that is in these books. And the footnotes are really excellent. So anybody who isn't happy just to either read the boxes or get an introduction into really important topics in the art market, ranging from, you mentioned the ivory bun, the question of how do we tax NFTs, whatever it might be, you can go further. And the footnotes, again, to me, having followed the art market and also coming from this German-English, I guess, history that we both share, they are just a joy to read. There is so much, I mean, when I was reading it, and maybe actually that's my first question to you, Dirk, is I was thinking of you sitting maybe at home with all this archival material, with newspaper clippings. And so maybe could you start by actually talking about how your research process is, because there is so many articles from even pre-digital ages when it's relevant, but you always know when to put in the latest material. So how, I mean, do you just really do research all the time and then, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, well, that sounds so grand. Yeah, I do research all the time. No, I read the papers, and when there is something I'm interested in, I kind of cut it out or copy it, and I have a good archive, and it's fairly big by now. But when there is something interesting, I can go and pull the drawer, and there is the file to whatever, the Ivory Band, and I can see what was published in '98. So I started the archive starts in around '95, and there aren't 100 articles on Ivory, but maybe 10, and you can see kind of the development of the discussion and what was decided when and what was implemented when or not and why not, and that gives you a good overview. And then of course you have to do the research to check what is real. Has it been done as the papers wrote or as the authors of the books have written? Because the archive is partly papers and online sources nowadays and partly books. But when I started, it's fair to say there wasn't really literature or research on the art market. There was the famous, what's the name, 3-volume Reitlinger, which I adored, and there wasn't much else. And what came out in the 90s was all about kind of, well, scandalizing the prices and kind of how can someone be so stupid to pay so much money for what my kid can do, etc. That type of literature or book. And there wasn't really much academic research around it. That only happened in the 90s, I would say.
Yeah. No, and I do think, and that will lead me to my first question, that sort of is picking up from maybe the end of the volume on the history of the art market, and coming still back to your notion of research, because I'm still impressed. So during the pandemic, where at least I was thinking about homeschooling my children, how to keep myself and my house sane, but also was one of the people who were, nurturing my sourdough starters to be able to make sourdough. But Dirk, of course, didn't do any of that, or he might have done some of this as well, but no, he wrote, of course, a book about crisis in the art market. And I remember vividly when we did an in-conversation, I think to an empty room at Christie's, which was then, streamed to broadcast to a live audience in Germany. And sadly, I think it's really, really sad that this book only exists in German, because it really discusses the sort of changes in crisis in the art market. Of course, the art market has always had crisis, but you make a really compelling argument why economic crises are changing, but also how COVID changed the art market. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, what do you think, how crises impact the art market? Is it like it has always been? What is different with our recent acceleration of crisis? Maybe?
Yeah, I mean, crisis always kind of touches everybody and everything, and kind of our lives, our health, our finances, etc. So to look at how is it touching the art market is a bit of an ivory tower thing. But on the other hand, so this came alive because we were all working from home. I was in London. Lockdown was fairly strict here. My neighbor lent me her apartment because she was in Berlin, and she said, "You have my keys. Use it as a office." And that's what I essentially did. And there was a lot going on, and actually our industry wasn't well prepared to go online, to become digital kind of overnight. We had these online sales, of course we had websites and online catalogs, auction catalogs, but the real kind of how is the process done online only, no one had really kind of thought through, or some better than others. But there was a lot of thinking work and definition work and decision work to be done, and this is what happened during the day, and it was super interesting and super exhausting, and a lot was new, and you had to deal with all the rest of it, like restructuring the company to think what collecting fields have a future and we need to prepare for, and what we need to drop because we cannot afford any longer or the marketplace can't. And so kind of to get my head around that, in the evenings fairly early I started to just take notes So what was it today? What were we discussing in the team? What did I feel about this and that? What was going on? And these notes essentially became the book. And understanding that a crisis, well, this crisis in 2020 was the final push to get us through digital business models like the luxury industry. And that's what was achieved in, I would say, in the course of 2021. So we made that move that nowadays in many cases, or in vast parts of the market, the transaction is now before you see the original. And that was the milestone. So what happened in the luxury industry in the late 90s. So in the old days, when you wanted to buy an expensive handbag, you would go to your shopping street, to the boutique of your choice, and you would look at the handbag because you wanted to see the design, the quality of the leather, the color in daylight, the proportions, whether it fits you, whatever. And then you would decide to buy it or not, and you would put your credit card there and you had it. And kind of after 2000, you would look it up, and you had seen it in whatever the party pages because some influencer was advertising it, and you would go for it, and you would click through this color and that, and you would give your credit card number, and whatever, 2 days later, that thing arrived, kind of packed like a fridge, but it was your handbag, and this might well have been the first time you saw the real thing. And this is what the art business has established then, with all the online viewing rooms of galleries, etc. And of course, this is not the New York evening sale with the $1 million prices. This is more kind of the vast majority of items that are sold. But this was the push through happened in 2020, 2021. And as a result, at Christie's nowadays, more than 90% of all bids for auction come in kind of via email or through a digital channel, no matter whether there is an online-only auction happening or a real auction in a room. And that was a bit of a starting point to try to understand how did crises pan out in the past? Did we go back to normal? Did they change a lot? And this is why I looked into actually partly my own research, but also what had been researched around when the internet bubble burst in 2000, or the big financial crisis, or that early Asia crisis in 1990. And this was then kind of helping that book coming to the point I wanted to make, and to see how the taste of the winners in a crisis would actually define the markets after. Hey, that drinks afterwards. That drinks afterwards. You're just in time. Would define. And actually, I will ask the lady next to me just to repeat what she said about my research. Would define the taste of the markets of the future hadn't been clear to me, and I found interesting.
But I'm right to say that you picked this up in your new book, so that everybody who can only read English can also find that in the latest. Yes, but that might not be the case. And so would you say, thinking about, so you just described the COVID pandemic as a catalyst for innovation. However, looking back at the other economic crises that you discuss in the history of the market and in the book, would you say that in the end, for the market, they've always been positive, or do you think there have also been real setbacks?
Well, there have been real setbacks in turnover, in economics, and kind of very simple. People not having money means people not spending money on art. But I think each of them has been a catalytic moment since the late 90s, or since 1990 actually. Yeah.
Right. Speaking of sort of the development in the last 20 years, and actually this is something that I found really fascinating in your second volume, where you talk, as you already said, around the structures of the art market and the different agents and how agents interact and who is doing what, that I was really sort of touched, and I think it's actually not a very trendy opinion to have, that you thought that art criticism was still so important, because I mean we know that the notion of the critic is dead, with Instagram, with social media, everyone can be their own critic, but you really make, I think, a very convincing argument why you think that beyond the curator, beyond the museum, beyond the institutions, we need art criticism. Can you say a little bit more why you think that informed art criticism is so important?
In a way, for the canonization process, you have kind of a group of opinion leaders, and some are noisier than others, and some are more conflicted in their interest. And of course, when an auction house person says, I would recommend you to buy this because it's in my next auction, well, you can read that, you understand what it means. It might mean, of all the offerings I have, this is the best. On the other hand, an art critic who goes to a museum and says, that's a great show, that's a great artist, a great position, whatever, has a different quality. And the art market does a great selection process and takes part in canonization. And as I write somewhere, I truly believe that there is a connection between financial value and artistic value. But on the other hand, the markets need kind of the neutral voices. And this is the curatorial people in institutions who do their selection process, what they buy to add to the museum's collections, or what they exhibit in platforms that do exhibitions only and don't carry that weight of kind of we have to collect for eternity and all our choices have to be checked against that. So I think it is regrettable that no one seems to be really willing to pay for quality journalism, and the space for that kind of gets smaller and smaller and is partly replaced by just opinions. And that's fine. It's interesting to listen to opinions, but it's just a different voice and it has a different quality. And I wonder what it will do long term or mid-term for the canonization process.
So, volume 3 is about legal frameworks, and for us non-lawyers in the room, let's not get maybe too... Yes, exactly. But let's talk about something, and we had a prior conversation that we were debating, well, should we bring up the B word? Should we talk about Brexit? As Germans living in the UK, we are obviously quite, invested in this topic, but I thought actually maybe it would be nice to see that Brexit is one example of now more, of course, where nations become more nationalistic, but also put up more barriers for the free circulation of art. And obviously I'm also thinking about the US and Trump and the new Brexit. Sorry?
Doesn't make it better, though.
No, exactly. So that's where I want to hear your thoughts on the maybe increasing, after having decades where we thought that with globalization we could trade everything barrier-free, especially talking about digital flows and money being traded more freely through digital channels. How you see the impact of increased legislation and taxes on the market?
Well, it has certainly...
In Brexit and beyond.
In Brexit and beyond. Well, Brexit. I remember that Sunday night in 2016, and I felt so insulted. I mean, I was just... I was almost packing. I didn't, thankfully. No, I think the positive side of the art market is it is trading mobile items, and art is or can be a global or universally understood language. And that's fantastic because so many goods produced are not. And then we also have to admit, people always have that amusing idea that the art markets aren't regulated. Well, speak to our compliance colleagues. It's the opposite. They're heavily regulated, just not centrally, just not in one place, as many other markets are. So even before Brexit and the whole kind of development towards a more nationalistic kind of world, there was quite a bit of legal framework to be respected when you traded in art. The interesting thing is that when you look at art markets, you usually have a national market for the vast majority of the cultural production of the place, and then you have an international, today a global layer, and that is the interesting bit because it is art of a quality that apparently appeals to many other people who are not necessarily entirely in tune with the artistic background or cultural world of the producers. So I always felt this was particularly interesting art. It usually also is, because it's an economy, particularly expensive art, but this is the part where, on the one hand, all these limitations kind of cut in severely, but on the other hand, high prices mean high commissions. So it's easier to have layers where your shipper can go the application process for an export license, etc. Having said that, people who work in the art market want to work with the art and with the collector and not applying for licenses. But still, I think many of these legislations have a good core and are important. And when you look at what happened to almost every country outside Europe until the 19th century, it's good that this is now kind of looked into and protected, that it doesn't increase, etc. On the other hand, to think that art is traded easily and can be used as a vehicle for whatever is almost naive, I would say.
So talking about art, and obviously as you were saying, your biggest, thickest volume is beautifully written about all the different collecting interests. And Tom and I, we just probably, as some of the people in the room, have just been to TEFAF, the Fine Art and Antiques Fair in Maastricht, and it's a really nice sort of similarity about all the topics you write about in the book. And I know that you yourself are really interested, apart from Emmy Knöbel, in some other collecting areas that might not be at the top end of the market, but you feel really strongly about. So it's really beautiful to see that the book is not only about contemporary art, and I say that as someone who likes also contemporary art a lot, but you also, and I guess this is where my question leads to, working at Christie's, and you write about that in depth. You have also been exposed and experienced the sale of NFTs. So where are we with that?
Let's phrase it, I've witnessed it, yes.
You witnessed it, yes, yeah. Exactly. So where do you think, where are we with the former NFT boom? I still have students writing dissertations about NFTs, so you young people still think it's really hot.
Well, to begin with, NFT is not art. NFT is a form of a certificate, and you can use it to certify a piece of digital art. So the real question is, do we think digital art is interesting and has a future? And if so, how can it be traded? And NFT is an offering. I'm surprised to see kind of how kind of in-depth the pure logic of that is discussed in the art world, whilst in the financial world, NFT came and took over. And a lot of certification in finance is done with that technology. So I would say that technology is here to stay, but it also means it will be superseded one day by something new that does the same job better, less time consuming, less energy consuming, and maybe then that label NFT comes to an end. In the arts, I would say a lot of that is driven by people who are able to use the medium, and what kind of comes of that is not necessarily art. And it'll be interesting. I mean, as we know, canonization takes a few years. When we look back in 10, 20 years, what actually was interesting and what was just graphic design kind of online. But I think, at least since the 20th century, cutting-edge contemporary artists were always interested in cutting-edge technology and media. So when film came, or when in the 19th century photography was invented, artists were interested. Not everybody, and it wasn't for everyone, but I think it's very fair to allow kind of the next generation of artists to play around with that and try to use it as something that can translate their own artistic language into a work, into a body of work. It's not for me. I'm, as I earlier said, when I struggled with the computer and said I'm a paper boy. I like the physical work, but yeah, I also know people who are young and have moved their household 20 times and live in tiny places in Shanghai and think it's very cool to move the monitor or the projector and they switch it on and then it's there or can be there.
So my last question, because I'm aware of time and wanting to give you the opportunity to ask questions, I want to just talk about the last volume a bit, but where you talk also about the places where art is traded and is exchanged, and that seems to be sort of shifting, interestingly, dialectically between, you know, the virtual world, because it's not, as you were describing, digital art that is being viewed on screen, but it's also, we talked about trading through digital means, but also after COVID, we all thought everything, you know, the art fairs were going to be dead, online auctions would take over, and the art world would be, you know, online, but that hasn't happened. So where do you see this going? Do you think we stick, and in your conclusions, and do you think this is correlated to what you described in your conclusion, that you see there is an ever greater gap between what you said so nicely, the best and the rest?
Melanie Görles, not me. That was a quote from Melanie.
Citing Melanie Görles, the best and the rest. So do you think, A, there is a correlation between, you know, the top end of the market being experienced in person? Do you think it just shows that people still want to go to physical events, engage with people physically like we do tonight here? Do you think the online is supplementary? What's your take on that?
Well, on a very personal base of view, I must say, I think art looks better when you stand in front of the original, and your experience is a better one, and it's a more holistic one when you can see it in all its dimensions and whatever. You see the real color and you can smell it, so to speak. On the other hand, we do an awful lot online without whatever, seeing, looking, smelling. We buy kind of, very personal things online nowadays without trying them on and the whole business that comes with it. But I think, so what I personally found really disturbing was that after COVID, most figures, visitor figures that is, went back to old levels pretty quickly, like cinemas, theaters, operas, whatever, swimming pools, fitness studios, you name it, but not museums. It took museums about 5 years to come back to 80-85% of the old figures, which means they still aren't there. And I wonder, why is that? Because, I mean, in the beginning, you could think about risk, health risk, but no, I mean, a cinema is much more risky, kind of in that old thinking of the pandemic. So I wonder what the pandemic has done to our idea to go to the museum to look at the original. Secondly, when you look at the art market, quite a lot is traded online only. That's not only online only auctions, but also PDFs sent by galleries before the fair opens. That's gallery websites, etc. I would say that when you're really familiar with an oeuvre, it's easier for you to understand a work or to gain what you believe is an understanding from kind of the online experience. What I don't think is that it's easy to find something new. So what you have when you go to a museum or when you walk a fair or when you go to an auction preview, you find something you haven't been looking for, and that is much more difficult. And I wonder whether that actually adds to this bottleneck of taste, that more people want the same, and kind of the next generation of artists is struggling to find their audience, to cut through to their audiences. And they have tried kind of the online way and social media and all these channels, and to a certain degree that works out. But I think it's a disruption. It creates the bottleneck of taste. It also might be an issue for the gallery business, for the gallery industry. Because it's easier to fall in love with something you stand in front of rather than you see on your screen. And I mean, at my age, and with my glasses, I love a big screen. My 14-year-old nephew does everything on his mobile phone. So the size of the screens goes smaller and smaller. So, I mean, how do you look at art on this, or decide what you love and what you want to buy, etc.?
Right, I think, I hope we showed you that the book is worthwhile reading, including all the references. But now we would love to hear your questions. So, oh wow, great.
Hello, thank you. I am currently doing my MA thesis at Courtauld, and I'm trying to connect the current art market to previous art markets, especially in terms of print market. And I'm trying to look at elements of crisis and gauging how can we look to the past for reference when it comes to crisis. Are there prior examples of crises similar to COVID that we can kind of use as a reference to maybe how the market's recovering or may recover in the future? So I'm kind of looking currently World War I, Spanish flu, and is it possible to connect these prior events that have impacted the market to the level of impact that we saw with COVID and the digitalization that followed past? So thank you very much.
Is that a summary of your thesis, or is it?
That's a question for you.
A question for me. Well, I don't know what to say. I do remember that there were many crises. I mean, 4 I have covered here. You mentioned the Spanish flu, tulip mania, etc. I think the interesting question is, what has every single crisis done to the distribution system and done to the development of taste, and how has that changed kind of during that crisis, and actually who are the stakeholders of these two developments? This is the interesting thing for me, and I think I would assume that in every single crisis you see a change of taste, and in almost none a change of distribution structure. Just my guess.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much. Kind of segueing into the question of crisis, with what's going on right now with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and then what's happening in globalization, and the alliances are shifting. Have you seen that? I mean, it's happened in the last month and a half. Have you noticed that in the art market? I mean, we're talking very contemporary right now. We're talking crisis and the politics of the world, and how has that shifted the art market? Have you noticed that in your practice?
Well, to begin with, the problem with the art market is that unlike, for example, the stock exchange, you can't open your computer and check where it stands. So you have these points where kind of market activity becomes visible. This is when the big fairs happen and when the big seasons are, like here in London, the seasons for the 20th century in March and October, which also means that in between these moments, like between Art Basel in June and Frieze in October, there are many months where you actually don't know where the market stands, because everything that happens is done in private. Very obviously, kind of times of crisis aren't booming markets. This is something you can see throughout the 20th century. On the other hand, it also helps the selection of art that is presented, because the market systems obviously want to present what they are convinced they can sell. So it's always interesting to see what these more difficult moments for society bring to the table, kind of already in the academies, but also at art fairs. And I have to admit that the primary market, the gallery business, is much more closer to these developments, because we on the secondary market, we retrade things that come back to the market, with very few exceptions. You saw some up there kind of a few minutes ago. I would think that the current crisis you started with Ukraine kind of led, when it happened, led to to greater to a more precise view of what actually means Russian. What is Russia? What is that country or culture or system we are looking at? What is Ukraine? And for example, at Christie's, we have learned that many artists we had traded or labeled Russian were actually from Ukraine. And that is something that happens everywhere. It also means that what we didn't know before of Ukrainian culture comes in a focus, because we wanted to understand, I mean, all of us want to understand what's going on there. So in a way, that shows you how markets are influenced. It also might mean that something that is still labeled Russian, because there is no other label for it available, might appear a bit less sexy at the moment. But then on the other hand, as you can see when you look at how big collectors have collected through war times, when you have the eye for the quality, maybe that's the moment to buy your Fabergé piece.
Hi, I'd like to know, who's your reader?
I would love to know.
The size of the people, the professionals in the art market is not too many. The collectors is a couple of thousands. And there is a lot of coverage of the art market. There is a lot of books written on the art market lately. Who are those people and why they don't buy any art? Because the art market is contracting.
Well, I think there is a bit of a delta in between these two figures of people who buy art, even if that's a shrinking number, and people who read about the art market. I think the professionalism that's used to look at the art market systems has increased over the past 25 years immensely. And before that, there was very little kind of on the market, and now there is quite a bit, as you rightly say. So I think in absolute numbers, it's not that much. I mean, how many books can we quote here? Maybe 10 we think are relevant. So who are my readers? It's very interesting when you put something out there, kind of everybody can see and can. It's like a bit like Instagram. People, you meet someone and they say, "Oh, I see you were at the Courtauld last night," and you think, "Oh, were you there?" No, but I saw it on Instagram. It's a bit like that. I meet people who all of a sudden say, "Oh, I read a book by you," and then what can I say? I can say thank you and I hope you liked it. But it's interesting to see how these products kind of find their ways. As I said earlier, when I spoke about my little kind of journey in publishing, I was always thinking of my students as prime readers. And this is why I wanted always to create an affordable and accessible product, essentially. I would hope that collectors and those who are interested in collecting and look for a door opening into the art market systems or the art market world think it's interesting to read about structures and the history of the market and stuff. So these are my core groups, I imagine at least.
Thank you so much, Dirk. That was really interesting. And I just want to touch on the last comments you made before opening for questions, specifically about the fact that museum numbers haven't returned in the same way as other activities, and also the fact that people are experiencing art on their screens. And it made me think of a dealer I was talking to last week who said, the problem we're having is the next generation aren't buying things.
Aren't buying, sorry?
Things,
items,
they
yeah.
want experiences. They're investing their money in activities rather than objects, etc. And I just wonder if you think there is a correlation between this kind of wholly digital experience. I just wonder how you think all of those things kind of coexist, and if you think there's a solution that means people come back to both engaging with art in person and buying art in the next generation. It's not a very clear question at all, but...
Yeah, and of course the honest answer is I don't know, because I'm certainly not of the next generation. What my experience is that let's speak about art events. So there's a whole industry out there offering art trips, and there seems to be a market for that. I would think when you go to a museum and when you go to a studio tour, when you go to, say, Berlin Gallery Weekend, and you see something you really like or think it's really interesting, very soon you come to the point whether you could have that, or could you have that? Is it affordable? Is it accessible? Would you be allowed to buy? Because we know there are gatekeepers out there. So I think once you are in that orbit, kind of that develops. And actually it's the same with luxury goods. So when you're interested in handbags, that interest will not only go the route to cut out magazine ads and do a scrapbook. You want to have one of those and you save money or whatever you do to get it. So I'm actually not so worried about the object owning thing. I think it's to get people into the art orbit. I think that's what interests me more. We have a great colleague in New York, Imogen, who kind of told me about her perception that the next generation is interested in art as a system of rules, of how you... I mean, we were a bit funny that evening, and we thought about art as the next religion. And kind of she said, yeah, but very often people inquire about art and how do I do it and what are the rules, and the rules get finer and finer the more you get into the small print. So I think this is the point that's really interesting. Kind of in the old days, many of us were brought up with that idea that art is important for social development, for a society, and can be beneficial for yourself. And that is something you find in my book on page 6. No, you can find in ancient societies. You find it in the Persian society in whatever 3000 BC. And I think that's important to not to lose that understanding or belief.
Thank you very much. Just kind of sticking to the digital art vein of things, one of the hot topics of the moment, what did you think of the recent sale at Christie's of AI art and the petition against it?
Yeah, you know what, this is not an art market question, this is a legal question, I would say. And having been given all that expensive legal training paid for by my parents, I would now say, I think the critical point here is the current legal view that it is kind of correct and allowed, and what the Americans would call fair use, to take everything that's out there on the internet to train an algorithm. And this algorithm then creates something, but for that creation you don't need the images from the internet anymore. And I would think the whole question of how that field develops is depending on that point, whether in the future, and this is driven by American law, as you would imagine, American courts still feel that kind of sucking up the internet and creating something, creating a mechanism that then creates new imagery is still legal and still falls under fair use. I think that's very questionable. I think it's fair for young artists, or for any artist, to use watermarks. If you don't want to be part of that, or you don't want your work to become part of that machinery. On the other hand, I know many people, not many, but I know some people who create art and say, I don't mind, I just want to be out there, and if my work is used for an algorithm to be trained, that's fine. I think all the copyright issues around that whole AI question, they are fairly easy, and many of them have been decided by now, and the few out there will be decided soon, because it's too big a market not to do that. But I think that the real question is, what is fair use in the times of AI?
So last question, and then...
Drinks.
Exactly. Thank you, Dirk.
Thank you so much. I'm very privileged to last question. Also just slightly struck by the number of North American people in this audience, which is so fascinating. But I was wondering if you could just speak a bit more about the museum side of things in the art market. So you were talking about how visitor numbers have been recurring to museums that they have to cinemas and consumer things. And I was wondering how that is then affecting kind of acquisition budgets, and maybe acquisitions aren't being made in the same way that museums. Maybe works are being gifted instead, or just works are going into private hands versus in public, or even the sale of public collections. And just wondering what your thoughts are about that. And I think in the crisis happening at the Tate, for instance, at the moment. So if you could speak on what's happening in the museums and how that's affecting the art market.
Well, when we think about art market and museums, believing that museums are big takers of artworks buying on the art markets. That's normally not the case. And the key word was acquisition budget. You already had it. I think to begin with, the term museum is in our language and in our imagination covering quite a bit of units or institutions. And in Europe, particularly in continental Europe, we think of a public place with a public collection that is owned by the state, and therefore the museum and its work is funded by the state. And this is how it works in most continental European and some UK museums. The work of a museum, or the challenge, has been defined since the foundation of the Louvre in the late 18th century, and that is collecting, communicating, researching, and this is unchanged till the present day. The problem is that the increase in value of fine art, especially 20th century fine art, has left acquisition budgets behind, and that is kind of the case everywhere, very visibly in Europe. The American museums, being differently structured in a legal way, have other methods of fundraising, and also can sell from their collections to bolster their acquisition fund. So I think again we can look at the big picture. The big picture is, let us all hope that our society in future will still believe that the museum is an important place for a community, for a society, but that also, for me as a German, meant the state needs to support the museum so the museum can do its job and can actually continue the collection. Continuing the collection has actually stopped in the, I would say, 70s, no? But then again, when we say museum, there is a lot of their private museums. There are real estate developments that are called museums to sell apartments in the upper floors. It's a label that has been stretched, but the very classic museum has the challenges nowadays that the canonization has changed, the Eurocentric or Anglo-American view on how a museum should look like, be structured and collect has changed. This is a process that's very much contemporary. So I've now totally lost my thread. I don't know what I wanted to say.
I think that's fine.
No,
and you can
support your local museum. This is what
exactly. I don't want to stop anybody doing that. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. I think it was a really inspiring talk. Of course, Dirk will also be around over drinks for any further questions that might occur. I also wanted to thank you all for coming tonight, and I wanted not to forget to thank Madeleine for supporting us this evening and the whole Research Forum team. We have a lot of events, we have lots of fascinating talks, and of course I'm delighted to announce that our next talk in the Art and Business Talk series will take place on the 16th of May, which will be hosted by my colleague Tom Stammers. And Tom is inviting Jean Strauss.
Jean Strauss. It's a lady.
Jean Strauss, I'm sorry. Jean Strauss. Sorry, I got a bit European here with my French pronunciation. Jean Strauss, to discuss her new book on the Wertheimer family, a key family of art dealers in early 20th century London, and their close relationship to the artist John Singer Sargent. So thank you all very much, and I invite you to come with me next time.